All right, so I got a lot of questions about how to make the root beer that I made, and I thought it might help if I made a video making my newest batch of my root beer. So if you want to look at the recipe, I'll put all of it down below in the description. But for now, let's go ahead and get into it. So first, there are a couple of pieces of equipment that you're probably gonna need. The first is obviously a big pot. I have this 5-gallon pot that I used to use for home brewing. So you'll need something probably about 5 gallons. I wouldn't go much smaller than that. You might be able to get away with 3 or 4, but I would stick with 5. If you have more, that's even better. The second thing you'll need is a spoon. Again, I have this giant spoon from Brewing, but any sort of spoon, a ladle, whatever that you can use to mix things around in this pot, you'll need that. And the last thing you'll need is some sort of bag. I use a nylon paint strainer. These are actually really cheap. You can get a 2-pack like this from Lowe's or Home Depot for a couple of dollars. If you do brew in a bag brewing, then the bag that you use to brew in a bag will work just fine. And this is essentially going to go in the pot here around the edge. And it's just going to allow you to steep all of your roots in the water, boil it in the water, simmer it in the water, and remove them later without having to pour it through a filter or something like that. You'll just take the bag out, pull it out. You'll see later. All right, so first I gotta get some water in this pot, and then we'll be right back. Okay, so as you can see, I've got probably about 4 gallons of water in the pot. You wanna make sure that it's pretty full because you want to have the maximum amount of water that you can fit in there along with your roots. And in fact, I'm gonna put some water into an electric kettle to bring up to boiling so that after I put in the roots, I can top it up to make it as full as possible. Now don't put your bag in yet. Wait until your water is already hot because you're gonna be heating this thing on full blast. And if your bag is in there and it's touching the bottom, it can scorch or melt to the bottom, especially if you're using the nylon paint strainer. So get your water hot first, then put your bag in. All right, so while that water's heating up, I'm gonna go over the ingredients that we're gonna be using. The first thing is sassafras. You can get this online. It's kind of hard to come by through normal channels, mostly because the FDA decided back in the 70s that saffrol was somehow a really bad carcinogen and bad for you, but it's actually not really that bad for you. It's not any worse than artificial sweeteners or anything like that. You'd have to drink a whole lot of root beer before this would be anything to worry about. So for this batch, we're using 4 ounces of sassafras root. The next thing we're using is Mexican sarsaparilla. We're using 2 ounces of that. We also have 2 ounces of birch bark, an ounce of burdock root, 1.5 ounces of licorice root, 3/4 of an ounce of ginger root, and 1/2 ounce of star anise, 1/2 ounce of wintergreen. Again, this you may have to go to a homebrew shop to get this at a reasonable price. An ounce of hops. So these are actually Cascade hops that I grew in my backyard. You can presumably get Cascade whole leaf hops at a homebrew shop as well. Probably run you about $3. We're using 12 ounces of unsulphured molasses. This will add sweetness and also give it a deeper brown sort of root beer color. 2.5 pounds of honey. This is a 5-pound container I got at Costco. I used half of it in my previous batch. I'm gonna use the remaining half in this batch. And then a pound of just granulated sugar. You can use cane sugar, table sugar, whatever. It's only a pound, so it doesn't matter that much. You could probably get away with brown sugar too. All right, so let's wait for our water to heat up. Well, we've got a nice boil going. And I've got myself a nice homebrewed German Pilsner. Cheers. So let's go ahead and get started. First thing we're gonna do is we're gonna lower the heat. In fact, we're gonna turn the heat all the way off. Next step is we're gonna take our bag We're gonna get it in to the pot, being careful not to burn ourselves on the pot, which is very, very hot. And we're gonna try and make sure that the bag does not touch the bottom of the pot, because that is where it will scorch to the pot if we're not careful. And then our next step is we're gonna go ahead and add in our ingredients. So here's some sassafras. Smells really good. Add in our birch bark, a burdock root. Burdock root I find really interesting. The smell is not something you would think of as being pleasant, and by itself I think it would be awful, but you can really notice the flavor that it gives to the final root beer, and I think it's actually a really nice flavor. It's very, very earthy. That was our Mexican sarsaparilla. Here's our licorice root. And then our ginger root with our star anise. I'm gonna make sure to mix that around, get everything soaking in the water. You can already smell a lot of the smells. Wintergreen. Here are our hops. 1 ounce Cascade hops. Those are dried, but they will soak that water right up. And they'll be looking just picked off of the vine in no time. Right, there we go, right there. And then the last thing I'm gonna do is top it up with hot water from my electric kettle. By having the largest volume of water in there as we can, we'll just basically be able to extract more flavor out of the roots and other ingredients. And then when we eventually top up to the 5-gallon mark in the keg, because we are going to keg this, we will wind up with as much flavor as we can get in that 5 gallons. All right, so I'm going to put the top on this. And I'm going to turn the heat back on, but I'm going to turn it on really low. Make sure it's simmering, just barely at a simmer for 30 minutes. Cheers. All right, so our 30-minute simmer is over. Let's take a look and see what we've got. It smells really nice and spicy. If you look at it, it's not exactly super duper dark. And like I said, we'll get some more color when we add the molasses. But it does smell really good. So the next thing we're gonna do is obviously turn off the heat. And then we're gonna remove the bag and we're gonna let it drain into the pot. Now the way I usually do this is with a cheap colander and a little drying rack that I use to sit on top of the pot so that the contents can drain into the pot. Be very careful because this is very hot. So I'm gonna let that drain there for about 5 or 10 minutes. Okay, so now that we've let that drip for a little bit and drain out, we're just gonna go ahead and remove it. And now it's time to start dissolving some of our sweeteners in here. Again, this is something you can adjust to your taste, just as with everything else in the recipe, but this is just how I do it. So I'm gonna start with the honey, 2.5 pounds. And it's even more important now to make sure that the heat is off because you don't want to burn this to the bottom of your pot. So just like if you're an extract home brewer, just like adding extract, you want to stir while you're adding. And also, just as with extract home brewing, you want to make sure you get all that goodness out of there. All right, so now let's go ahead and add our molasses. Again, stir while you're adding it. And again, we want to get all that goodness out of there. Careful, it is hot. Now, time to add our sugar. If this winds up being too sweet for you, you can definitely use less sugar. Usual rule of thumb for making soda is about 1 pound per gallon, and this winds up being a little less than that. There's the 2.5 pounds of honey, the 1 pound of table sugar. That makes 3.5 pounds plus the molasses, and I don't know exactly how much that weighs, but it'll be a little bit less sweet than a commercial root beer. Again, if you want more sweetness, just add more sugar. If you want less, just add less. Of course, the best way to find out whether or not it's the right level of sweetness for you is to actually try it. Just make sure you let it cool down first. I think that's about right. All right, now the last step is going to be to get this into a sanitized keg. Just be careful because it's a lot of liquid and it's really hot. And with the addition of all that sugar, it's going to be really sticky. So if it gets on you, it could burn you. So I'm just going to drop a funnel into my sanitized keg and probably try to ladle some of this in to take some off the top so that it's not so full, because otherwise it's going to splash everywhere if I try to pour it. All right, so we've dumped all of it into the keg. Keg's almost full, but we're gonna top up with cool water. All right, and then the last step will be to take this, I'm gonna stick it in my chest freezer, get it nice and cold, put it under about 12 to 14 pounds per square inch of carbon dioxide. And in about a week, we should have root beer. One thing to remember is if you do put your root beer in one of your kegs, if you also use your kegs for homebrewed beer, root beer has a very, very powerful flavor. And so it's going to pretty much permanently make your keg into a root beer keg. So if you are gonna do this, pick a keg and stick with that one. Same goes for your serving tubing. So I just use a picnic tap to serve my root beer directly out of my chest freezer. I don't want to make everything taste like root beer. We'll see how this turns out in about a week. Cheers. All right, so it's been a little over a week, maybe about a week and a half, and I think the root beer is carbonated, so let's give it a try. All right, so you can definitely see this is very full-bodied. I'll try and give you a little close-up. It's got a very creamy looking head, but it's also very turbid, and it's a little bit lighter in color than the previous batch was. The previous batch was bordering on black. Very, very, very dark brown. This is a much lighter brown. I think maybe the reduction in the amount of anise contributed a little bit to the lighter color. Let's give it a nose. Okay, still get anise and licorice root in the nose, but there's definitely a lot more going on there than just the anise. Let's give it a taste. Okay, it's not that sweet. I'm definitely getting some of the hop bitterness from those hops that we boiled for 30 minutes. They definitely contributed some bitterness. May have actually overdone it a tad on the sassafras. Definitely not as sweet as a root beer you would normally get. There's the bitterness from the hops. There's also, I think, just not as much sugar as you would normally get. So you get more of a spicy, earthy note. If you like your root beer sweeter, you definitely are going to want to add a little bit more sugar. And you may want to delay putting the hops in until the very end, or you may want to leave them out altogether because they're definitely contributing a bit of bitterness. But overall, I think I'm pleased with the result. I kind of like the bitter note. Cuts the sweetness a little bit. But this is definitely not going to be for everyone. If you're the kind of person who has a sweet tooth, you may want to up the sugar and you may want to get rid of the hops. As for the color, I'm not exactly sure what to do. Maybe next time I'll try adding more molasses because that definitely contributed to the color, or possibly just get some caramel coloring and color it myself. I personally don't really care. I think it looks fine, but some people might be a little put off. The haziness, the turbidity, it's absolutely opaque. There's no seeing through that at all. Might turn some people off, but if you color it to make it darker, they won't really notice. All right, well, thanks for joining me on this little adventure. I'm definitely gonna post more about my experiences making root beer and the things that I've learned in the process. I think my take home from this experience is that the hops are not for everyone, and that the star anise was definitely contributing some color to the last batch. I want to hear about your experiences making root beer. If you've learned anything, if you have any information to share, please do. Cheers.